Hey horror fans, welcome to another episode of Room 237 Presents Reslashed, the show where I take a classic horror film and its modern remake and I compare them, see which one did it better, and ultimately if it needed to be remade in the first place. And today I'm going to do 1980s slasher classic Prom Night and 2008's Prom Night. And I know by this point it must look like I'm gaining up on the universally panned ones just to say all remakes are bad. But to be honest, I'm just doing ones that I've already reviewed both films of, and these ones I have to do quick or else I'll forget because they're forgettable. So ultimately, let's look at the cast. Obviously, this one stands out amongst most 80s slashers because of Jamie Lee Curtis. This was her second slasher film after Halloween. And this is the one that really helped propel her into stardom. At least horror stardom, and then she went on to do other things. But you also have, you have Leslie Nielsen, which I think this was before Airplane came out. So this might be one of his last actually very serious roles. Both are an absolute joy to watch. I mean, especially if you watch this next to Halloween and you just see how Jamie Lee Curtis goes from being the very like introverted bookworm to the extroverted, fun-loving popular girl in this. She does a good job. And if you're a Zucker fan like I am, then you know Leslie Nielsen is one of the funniest men to ever live. So to see him in such a serious role is also very fun. 2008 doesn't really have anybody. I mean, you have Brittany Snow, who's our lead. She was in Hairspray. The killer is Jonathan Sheck from That Thing You Do. And I don't know who anyone else is. Some of them look moderately familiar, and I think they're all just from films like this. It's another slasher film, or another horror film, I should say, that just has a pretty CW cast. That's it. So again, which brings me to my usual point when it comes to cast. Would you rather have a cast of normal-looking, relatable characters, which, yeah, the acting may not be the best, but even if it comes off as campy or hammy or over-the-top acting, it still might have a charm to it, but at least the actors are normal-looking people that makes it more relatable. Whereas in this, it's like the Fright Night remake. It's just everybody in it is pretty. Everybody in it is good looking. It's like there is not one average looking person in this movie, and none of them are particularly good actors, except for Idris Elba. I will give this movie the point of Idris Elba, but ultimately I would have to give the cast to Prom Night. I'd rather see normal looking people, whether they can act or not. And in this, yeah, the acting does feel authentic. It's not as cheesy as, other 80s horror films. Although, maybe a little bonus point, these are the kind of people you want to see get killed in horror films. These are ones you're supposed to root for and feel bad for when they get killed. That's what makes it scary. But when it's just a bunch of pretty rich kids, you don't give a fuck if they get killed. So, I will award this movie that point. Next, we have the effects. Now, neither movie was exceptionally big in the blood and gore aspect. Even the original. The original was more of a Halloween type film than, say, Friday the 13th. But when it did have its kills, like a guy's head getting cut off and thrown down the prom stage in front of everyone, it's done practically and it looks good. And with this, I actually had a hard time telling if it was CGI or practical blood. Reason being, even though this is another one that says fucking unrated, it was a PG-13 horror film. You get like one spray of blood, but that's about it. All the other blood you see is like on someone's shirt or on the dude's knife. And even though I'll say I couldn't really tell, normally that would be a compliment, but it's a fucking slasher film. Slasher films are supposed to be bloody. And even though Halloween isn't bloody, it's still a good movie. Prom Night, even though it still has practical effects, gory effects, it's worthy of being called a slasher film. This one was lackluster. Even though the filmmakers thought it'd be scarier to tone it down and make it more realistic, it fell on its face. So even though both films are low on the, they're both low when it comes to the effects, Prom Night is the one that had both quantity and quality. Atmosphere. Neither movies are truly atmospheric. I will say this one was a bit more claustrophobic, having kids being chased through, the hallways of the school. That, so it's more claustrophobic. Or the scene in the van, that was done better. Also, with a movie like Prom Night, the atmosphere of it being in a school makes it a little bit more relatable. You're able to immerse yourself in the movie more. Whereas with this one, it's in a huge, luxurious, hotel, like a 5-star resort, exclusively for pretty rich kids. I've never heard of a prom being in a fucking hotel, so I don't know what they were trying to go for. But yeah, and this movie is neither claustrophobic or really utilizes its surroundings very well. So even though neither one still are very atmospheric in The Shining or The Thing kind of sense, this one utilizes, this one is more claustrophobic. Trying to hide is hard, and so I have to give it to the classic. Scares. Alright. That's easy. This one is all jump scares with loud noises, just bah. Not as bad as like the remake of It, but it's just silence followed by loud noises. This one is not. This one has moments of silence with the killer stalking someone. Granted, this one has that scene too in the basement with the girl hiding, but it's mostly just cheap PG-13 jump scares. So I have to give it to this. The next point would be the killer. Now, this is where we have a big drop-off, because this film was a mystery. Now, not all slasher films are mysteries, but the slasher genre was inspired by Italian giallo films. And the mystery makes it a little bit more fun. It's more interesting. It keeps you hooked more. And usually, the reveal at the end for who the killer is usually supposed to be shocking. It doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it's kind of left field, but when it works, it really works. And in this, it worked. And, I like the look of the killer. All black ski mask. Yeah, he was kind of clumsy like in Scream. Made it a little bit more relatable. It sort of added humanity to the killer. So, look the way the killer acted, his personality, the way he killed. He killed in a number of different ways, so there's variety. And the reveal at the end, it made sense, it was shocking, and it led to an emotional ending. This was the complete opposite. You knew who the killer was from the first scene of the movie, and they tried their hardest to make him look like an unmasked killer. At first, he looks like Charles Manson. Then they just made him look like just a regular guy, with a ball cap and everything. The whole escaped killer, because it's a teacher obsessed with a student. He's not particularly threatening or intimidating looking, because that's the thing. If they're masked, they can look however. If they're unmasked, you really got to make them look threatening or intimidating. And this one really wasn't. And he basically just killed with a knife through the whole movie. So, a pretty lackluster, run-of-the-mill killer. This one definitely stands out. Even the poster, the original theatrical poster was the ski mask with the knife. That at least stuck in my memory. I wish I could have had that cover on this DVD. So, definitely going with the killer in this one. Score. Okay. Score or music. This, believe it or not, is going to be a draw. Because I myself personally am not a big fan of disco or hip-hop music. But what I can say is both films are appropriate for the time. You had dancing to disco and you had dancing to modern hip-hop music. So both were appropriate for the time. It's prom, people were dancing to it, seemed to fit. I'll call it a draw. Plus, the actual score itself wasn't really too memorable from either film, for me personally. So now let's look at whether it deserved it. Well, ultimately, I myself find this to be a much more enjoyable film. This to me feels like a slasher film. This one does not. And also, with the notion of whether it's it honors the source material or is just drastically different, this movie is 100% different. This movie could have been called anything else and it wouldn't have mattered. But I can't really fault it for that, because Prom Night, there's actually a series of these films. There's 4 Prom Night films. Of course, 2, 3, and 4 have nothing to do with this film. It's just 3 other movies, more or less their own series, that cashed in on the Prom Night title. This one essentially did the exact same thing. So I can't really fault it for that, but at the same time, it really didn't need to be made. It doesn't really have anything going for it. And, it just goes to show with how different this movie is, the fact that it put the popular title of Prom Night over it to try and cash in, and it still is considered one of the worst films of all time. Okay, one of the worst horror films of the 2000s, especially when it comes to remakes. Just goes to show that people weren't interested in a remake. People still talk about this film. So we would have done, I haven't even heard people talk about the sequels. So I would say we would have been just fine with just this movie. I can't speak for the sequels because I haven't seen them. But when it comes to the verses of these two, I would say ultimately all we really needed was this. So, yeah, I know this show's still kind of sloppy. I'm still trying to work the bugs out and get like a concrete format going. But, you guys can let me know what you think, if I should keep going with this kind of show. It's something I want to do, and let me know what you think. But anyways, thank you for watching.